Calvo stood in the observation deck of the Zentari diplomatic vessel and watched the human ship approach through the viewport. The vessel was crude by his standards, with visible weld marks along its hull and what appeared to be mismatched armor plating bolted onto its frame. For 300 cycles, the Zentari collective had maintained peace through perfect warfare there. Automated defense systems calculated every variable, and their AI-driven fleets fought with mathematical precision wars were won through logistics and superior calculations. With minimal casualties on both sides, it was civilized and predictable and safe. Humans were none of those things when the strange transmissions had first reached the Zentari space 6 months ago. The High Council had been curious, and new species making their first steps into the greater galaxy was always an opportunity for expansion of the collective. Initial reports had been promising humans possessed faster-than-light travel and basic energy weapons. They had unified their homeworld under a single governmental structure and seemed eager to make contact. But then the Vryn swarm had begun its advance. The Vryn were different from any enemy the Zentari had ever faced. They did not calculate or negotiate. They simply consumed everything in their path. Converting organic matter into more Vryn 3 colony worlds had fallen before the collective had even understood what was happening. The Zentari fleets had engaged the swarm with their usual precision, but the Vryn did not follow predictable patterns. They attacked in overwhelming numbers without regard for losses. Every battle was a calculation of acceptable attrition, and the Vryn seemed willing to accept infinite losses as long as they eventually overwhelmed their targets. The High Council had made a logical decision. They needed allies with fresh perspectives and new tactical approaches. The humans had been offered membership in the defensive pact against the Vryn. Calvos had been assigned as military observer to the first human combat unit deployed to collective space, the 3rd Expeditionary Marines, they called themselves. He had spent the last week aboard their transport ship trying to understand them. It had not gone well. The humans were loud and chaotic. They argued during tactical briefings, interrupting their officers with questions and suggestions. They made jokes about death and combat that Calvos found deeply unsettling. Their equipment was maintained haphazardly with personal modifications that violated standardization protocols. Most disturbing was their emotional volatility. Zentari soldiers were calm and focused at all times, maintaining perfect discipline through neural conditioning. Human soldiers laughed and shouted and sometimes even fought each other in what they called sparring matches. Calvos had watched 2 Marines physically strike each other in the cargo bay and had nearly triggered a security alert before another human explained they were friends bonding through combat. The concept made no sense to him. He had compiled his initial reports with growing concern. The humans would be of limited tactical value. Perhaps they could serve in garrison roles or labor battalions. But frontline combat required discipline they clearly lacked. Docking clamps engaged with a metallic clang, and Calvos made his way to the airlock. The human commander was already waiting. Captain Maria Santos stood barely up to Calvos' chest, but she carried herself with an authority that seemed to fill the corridor. Dark eyes studied him with an intensity that made his secondary eyelids twitch in discomfort. "Observer Calvos," she said, extending her hand in the human greeting gesture. "Welcome aboard the Thermopylae." He touched her palm, briefly mimicking the gesture he had studied. Her grip was stronger than he expected. "I trust your accommodations have been adequate," Santos continued as she led him through the ship's corridors. "They are sufficient," Calvos replied, "though I must note that noise discipline appears to be lacking aboard this vessel." Santos smiled, and the expression did not reach her eyes. "My Marines are loud," she agreed. "You'll get used to it." They passed through the crew quarters where humans were engaged in various activities. Some maintained weapons while others played games or consumed recreational substances. The lack of order disturbed Calvos deeply. "Captain Santos," he began carefully, I notice your soldiers do not maintain proper formation protocols during rest periods. They're off duty, she said. They can relax how they want, but combat readiness requires constant discipline. Santos stopped walking and turned to face him. Observer, my Marines. I've been in stasis for 3 months traveling to get here, she said. Before that, they spent 8 months fighting insurgents in the Tau Ceti colonies, and before that, they did a 2-year deployment on Europa during the ice mining disputes. She crossed her arms. They've earned their rest, and when the shooting starts, you'll see they know exactly what to do. Calvos wanted to argue, but something in her tone suggested the conversation was over. They continued to the armory, where a sergeant was conducting weapons inspection. Kilovs observed as each Marine presented their rifle for examination. Weapons were well maintained, he had to admit, but each one was different. Personal sights, custom grips, and various modifications made every rifle unique. Does this not cause logistical complications? Calvos asked. If parts cannot be interchanged between weapons. The sergeant looked up and grinned. Observer, these Marines know their weapons better than they know their own mothers. He said, every modification is personal, every adjustment is based on how that individual soldier fights. But tactical efficiency requires standardization. Tactical efficiency, the sergeant repeated. Sir, we don't fight efficient, we fight effective. And there's a difference. Calvos did not understand the distinction. That evening he was invited to observe a tactical briefing. Human officers gathered around a holographic display showing potential Vrin approach vectors. Captain Santos stood at the head of the table. Intelligence reports suggest the swarm is gathering forces for a push toward the Kratos station, she began. If they take it, our supply lines to the outer colonies get cut. Defensive calculations show the station cannot be held against a full swarm assault, one of the Zentari liaisons said. Evacuation protocols should begin immediately. Negative, Santos said flatly. We hold that station. Captain, the mathematics are clear. Santos leaned forward over the table. Then, we changed the mathematics, she said. My Marines didn't come here to watch calculations, we came here to fight. The Zentari liaison's translator struggled with her tone. Fighting against impossible odds is not courage, he said. It is waste. It's not impossible until we're dead. Santos replied, and we're not dead yet. Calvos watched this exchange with growing alarm. The humans seemed determined to ignore tactical reality in favor of what they called determination. It would get them killed and waste valuable resources in the process. He made notes in his report pad. The 3rd Expeditionary Marines showed poor discipline, inadequate respect for tactical calculations, and a dangerous tendency toward emotional decision-making. Recommended they be assigned to low-priority garrison duties where their lack of proper military conditioning would cause minimal harm to overall defensive operations. As he returned to his quarters that night, Calvos felt certain of his assessment. The humans were brave, perhaps even noble in their primitive way, but they were not real soldiers, not by Zentari standards, not by any civilized standards. He had no idea how wrong he was. He had no idea that within days he would witness something that would change his understanding of warfare forever. He had no idea that he was about to learn what it truly meant when humans decided to fight, and he had no idea that the emotion he would feel watching them would be the one thing he had never experienced in 300 cycles of civilized warfare. The alarm started at 040 station time. Calvos jerked awake in his quarters aboard Kratos station as emergency lights flooded the corridors with pulsing red. His communicator was already screaming with priority alerts. All personnel, this is not a drill. The station I announced. Vrin swarm contacts detected at grid 773, initiating defensive protocols. Calvos pulled on his observer uniform and rushed to the command center. Main display showed a nightmare. Hundreds of Vrin Bioships were emerging from hyperspace in a coordinated assault pattern. They moved like a swarm of insects, each ship a living organism dedicated to one purpose: consumption. Status report. Admiral Dexner demanded from the command throne. 1,200 contacts and rising, the tactical officer replied. Estimated time to weapons range, 14 minutes. Fleet disposition. The defensive flotilla is moving to intercept, but the numbers, the officer's voice trailed off. Calvus could see the calculations running on the secondary displays. The Centauri had 8 warships in the sector. The Vrin had overwhelming numerical superiority. Recommendation. Dexner said. The tactical AI processed for exactly 3 seconds evacuation, it stated. Projected casualty rate for defensive action, 87%. Probability of total fleet loss with 0% probability of successfully defending the station. Begin evacuation protocols. Dexner ordered all military personnel to defensive. Position civilian population to evacuation berths. The command center became organized chaos as Centauri efficiency took over. Every person moved with purpose, executing predetermined evacuation procedure. As Galavos was assigned to evacuation transport 7, along with 30 other observers and diplomatic personnel. He was halfway to the berth when he heard the shouting, "Belay that order." Captain Santos stood in the corridor with her Marines forming up behind her. "Captain, the evacuation is mandatory." A Centauri security officer said, "For you maybe." Santos replied, "My Marines are staying." The tactical analysis is clear. This station cannot be defended. Then the analysis is wrong. The security officer's translator struggled again. Mathematics cannot be wrong. Santos stepped closer. "Watch us prove you wrong," she said. 3rd Marines were going to defensive positions now. "Captain, this is illogical." "Yeah, well, we're human," Santos said. "We don't do logic, we do stubborn." Calvos found himself walking toward them instead of toward his evacuation berth. "Captain Santos, you understand that remaining here is almost certainly fatal." She looked at him, and something in her expression made his blood chill. "Observer, we didn't come to this sector to run calculations," she said. "We came here to fight, and that's what we're going to do." "But why?" "Because that station," she pointed up at the ceiling, "keeps supplies running to 17 colonies with 3 million people, and if we lose it, those people are exposed to the swarm. The Centauri fleet will retake the station in 6 months. A lot of people can die in 6 months." The first impacts shook the station. Vrin had Aravid Calvos made a decision that violated every protocol in his training. I am staying as well," he said. Santos, "Grab a weapon," she said. "You're about to get an education." The Marines moved through the station like they had been born there. They set up defensive positions in corridors that Calvos would never have of considered tactically valuable. They rigged emergency bulkheads with explosives. They turned fire suppression systems into weapon delivery mechanisms. "What are you doing?" Calvos asked as he watched 2 Marines wire something into the environmental controls. "Making the station inhospitable," one of them replied. "The Vrin breathe oxygen just like us, right?" "Yes." "Well, they're about to find out what carbon monoxide poisoning feels like." Calvos was horrified. "That will kill anyone in those sectors." "Yeah," the Marine said, including Vrin. The first Vrin boarding pods hit the outer hull. Captain Santos stood in what had been the station's main marketplace, now transformed into a killing ground. "They'll come through there, and there," she said, pointing at 3 access points. "How do you know?" "Because those are the fastest routes to critical systems," she said. "And the Vrin are predictable even if they don't follow your math." The bulkheads exploded. In-war Vrin warriors poured through. Calvos had seen images of the Vrin, but confronting them in person was different. They were insectoid with chitinous armor and multiple limbs ending in razor-sharp claws. They moved with terrifying speed. The Marines opened fire. The sound was deafening. Human weapons were louder than Centauri energy rifles, and the muzzle flashes lit up the darkened Marketplace like lightning, the Vryn fell in waves, but more kept coming. Fall back to secondary positions. Santos ordered that the Marines moved in coordinated chaos covering each other as they retreated. Calvos ran with them, his observer status forgotten in the desperate need to survive. They reached a choke point where the corridor narrowed. "Here," Santos said, "we make them pay for every meter." The Vryn charged the Marines, met them with gunfire grenades, and when the Vryn got close enough with knives and fists, Calvos watched a human soldier empty her rifle into a Vryn warrior, then use the weapon as a club. When it ran dry, he saw a Marine with a shattered arm still throwing grenades with his good hand. He saw Captain Santos shoot a Vryn point blank, then stab another with a combat knife, all while shouting orders to her scattered units. It was brutal and savage and completely unlike any warfare Calvos had ever witnessed. The Zentari fought from distance with precision. The humans fought like cornered predators. The Vryn pushed deeper, the Marines fell back again and again, turning each retreat into an ambush. Hours passed. Calvos lost track of time. In the chaos, the station shook with explosions. Atmosphere vented from breached sections. The lights failed in entire districts, and still the humans fought on. The second day, Calvos saw something that would haunt him. A Marine named Rodriguez had been hit by Vryn weapons. Her legs were useless, and she was bleeding from multiple wounds. Medics said she had maybe an hour. Rodriguez sent them away. She dragged herself to a junction where 3 corridors met and set up her remaining grenades in a careful pattern. When the Vryn came through, she waited until they were all in the kill zone. Then she detonated everything. The explosion collapsed all 3 corridors, killed 40 Vryn warriors, and bought her squad 10 minutes to reach a more defensible position. Calvos found her body in the rubble afterward. She had been smiling on. The third day, the Vryn breached the command center. Captain Santos was down to 27 Marines. They had started with 150. "This is it," she said calmly. "We hold here." "Oh, we don't hold at all, Captain," Calvos said. "Why do you continue? This is mathematically impossible." She looked at him with eyes that had not slept in 72 hours. "Because every minute we hold is another minute. Those colonists have to prepare," she said. "Because if we run now, we teach the Vryn that humans can be broken." She reloaded her rifle. "And because we're Marines, and this is what we do." The Vryn came. The Marines fired until their weapons melted. They fought with knives and tools and bare hands. Calvos found himself wielding a length of pipe against a Vryn warrior and discovered that he too could become savage when survival demanded it. The battle raged. The command center filled with smoke and blood, and then through the chaos, Calvos heard its shipping engine as in Thari shipping engines. The fleet had returned early and able to accept the loss of the station. They had broken protocol and come back. They found Kratos Station still in human hands. They found 23 Marines still alive, still fighting. They found Captain Santos standing in the ruins of the command center, covered in blood, both Vryn and her own, and they found Calvos standing beside her, finally understanding what it meant when humans decided that mathematics could be overruled by will. The Vryn retreated when the fleet arrived. The station was saved, but Calvos looked at the price scattered around him in the bodies of humans who had fought beyond reason, beyond calculation, beyond any tactical doctrine he had ever studied. He began to understand that he had been wrong about everything. These were not primitive soldiers lacking discipline. They were something far more terrifying. They were humans who had decided not to lose, and they would pay any price to ensure that outcome. Calvos sat in the medical bay of the Zentari flagship and stared at his hands. They were still shaking. 3 weeks had passed since Kratos Station. 3 weeks since he had watched humans fight like demons to hold an indefensible position. 3 weeks since he had discovered that his entire understanding of warfare was incomplete. The medics had cleared him physically, no permanent damage beyond some bruising and minor lacerations. But something inside him had changed in those 72 Hours he could not stop thinking about what he had witnessed. Captain Santos found him there on the 7th day of recovery. She walked with a slight limp from her injuries, but otherwise seemed entirely herself. "Observer," she said, sitting down beside him. "You've been avoiding the debriefings." "I am completing my reports," he replied. "That's not what I asked." Calvo set down his datapad. "Captain Santos, I have been a military observer for 40 cycles," he said. "I have witnessed 17 different conflicts across 9 different species." He looked at her. "I thought I understood warfare," he continued. "The Centauri have perfected it through mathematics and precision. But what I saw at Kratos, that was not warfare as—" "I know it." "No," Santos agreed. "It wasn't." "Then what was it?" She was quiet for a moment. "It was survival," she said finally. "The kind of fighting you do when calculation doesn't matter anymore, when the only thing left is refusing to quit. But the cost, 127. Dead," Santos said softly. "I know every name, every face." Her jaw tightened. "But 3 million colonists are still alive because of what they did," she said. "That's the math that matters to us." Calvos realized he needed to understand. "Captain, I request permission to study human military history," he said. "I need to understand how your species developed these tactics." Santos stood. "Permission granted," she said. "But observer, be warned, once you see it, you can't unsee it." "See what?" "What we really are." Over the following weeks, Calvos immersed himself in human history. Centauri databases had limited information, but what was there was enough. He started with recent conflicts, the Europa Ice Wars, where humans fought in temperatures that would kill most species. The Tau Ceti insurgency, where civilians became soldiers and cities became battlegrounds. Great unification wars that had finally brought Earth under a single banner at the cost of billions of lives. But those were just the surface. He went deeper. You read about something called World War II, where humans had killed each other by the tens of millions. Learned about nuclear weapons that could destroy entire cities, and that humans had actually used them twice. He discovered the concept of total war, where entire populations became targets and entire economies converted to military production. He found records of the siege of Leningrad, where humans had eaten leather and wallpaper paste rather than surrender. He read about the bombing of Dresden and Tokyo, where humans had deliberately created firestorms to burn enemy cities. He learned about the Holocaust and the rape of Nanking and discovered that humans were capable of systematic atrocity on scales that made his translator glitch trying to find words. He went further back, medieval siege warfare, where armies would starve entire cities. The Mongol conquests, where surrender meant death and resistance meant worse. The Punic Wars, where Rome had literally salted the earth of Carthage so nothing would ever grow there again. Ancient tribal warfare, where neighboring villages would exterminate each other over resources. And everywhere he looked, he found the same pattern. Humans fought without restraint. They adapted constantly. They used everything as a weapon. They accepted casualties that would break any other species. They had spent 10,000 years refining the art of killing each other. "This cannot be real," he said to Captain Santos when she visited him again. "Your species cannot have survived this level of self-destructive violence." "We almost didn't," she admitted. "Several times actually, but we're stubborn that way. The nuclear weapons alone, we built enough to destroy our world 20 times over," Santos said, pointed them at each other for decades, and somehow managed not to use them after the first 2. "How?" "Fear," she said simply. "We scared ourselves enough that we stepped back from the edge most of the time anyway." Calvos felt his secondary eyelids flutter. "Most of the time. We're not perfect," Santos said, "but we learn eventually." He showed her a passage he had found about something called the Battle of Thermopylae. "Your ship is named after this," he said. 300 Spartans held a pass against a Persian army for 3 days, Santos said. Bogre's time to prepare fought to the last man. But they all died. Yeah, she said. But they're remembered 3,000 years later, and the lesson stuck. Sometimes you hold the line no matter what. This is insane. This is human. Calvo spent another week compiling data, learned about human concepts that had no Xanthari equivalent. Scorched Earth tactics where armies destroyed their own territory to deny it to enemies. Pyrrhic victories where winning cost so much it might as well be defeat. Acceptable losses, which implied some losses were not acceptable, but humans fought anyway. War crimes which terrified him because it meant humans had to define limits on warfare, because without limits, they would do absolutely anything. And total war, the concept that had no translation in Xanthara War, where every resource, every person, every scrap of material went toward victory. War, where civilian and military became meaningless distinctions. War, where the goal was not defeat, but annihilation. He found a human officer in the fleet cafeteria and asked about it. Lieutenant Chen listened to his question and nodded slowly. Total war is when we stop fighting to win and start fighting to survive, Chen said. It's when we decide the other side has to be destroyed completely. Has humanity ever fought such a war? Several, Chen said. The big ones were the world wars, but there were others. We've been fighting total war since we lived in caves. Against what enemy? Everything, Chen replied. Ice ages, predators, disease, starvation, other tribes, the planet itself. And when we ran out of external enemies, we fought each other. He leaned forward. Observer, humanity spent 99% of our existence nearly dying, he said. Every generation faced extinction from something, and somehow we survived by being meaner, tougher, and more willing to do whatever it took. That is horrifying. Yeah, Chen agreed. It kind of is, but it's also why we're here, having this conversation instead of being extinct. Calvos returned to his quarters and composed a new report. This one was different from his earlier assessments. He detailed everything he had learned, the human capacity for violence, their refusal to accept defeat, their willingness to pay any price for survival, their 10,000 years of constant warfare, their terrifying innovations in killing. And he added a conclusion that made his hand shake as he typed it. The humans are the most dangerous species in known space, he wrote. Not because of their technology or their numbers, but because of their mindset. They have evolved to treat extinction as an enemy to be defeated through will alone. They do not fight wars to solve problems. They fight wars to ensure their continued existence. They are apex predators who have spent their entire history hunting the most dangerous game that exists, each other. And now they are our allies. He sent the report to the High Council 3 days. Later he received a response. His concerns were noted, but considered overstated. Humanity was a valued ally against the Vrinther. Passionate approach to combat was an asset, not a liability. And besides, the Xanthari had no intention of ever giving humans a reason to consider them enemies. Kilvos read the response and felt something cold settle in his chest. Council did not understand. They still thought of warfare in terms of calculations. They had not seen what he had seen at Kratos The, had not read what he had read in human history. They had not yet learned to fear Captain. Santos found him that evening. You look troubled, she said. I submitted my report, Calvo said. The council dismissed my concerns. What concerns? He looked at her directly. That humanity is the most frightening ally one could have, he said, because allies can become enemies. Santos was quiet. You're not wrong to worry, she said finally. We are scary when we want to be, but observer, we're your friends and we protect our friends until you do not. Then you better hope you never give us a reason to change our minds. It was not meant as a threat, but Calvos felt it like one anyway. He had learned what humans were capable of, and he understood now that there was a difference between fighting beside them and fighting against them. A difference he hoped the galaxy would never have to learn firsthand. The War Council met in the great chamber of Zinthari Prime Calvos, stood at the back with the other observers, and watched the holographic display update with devastating news. The Vryn swarm had grown intelligence, reported massive hive fleets gathering. At the edge of collective space breeding, worlds were producing warriors at unprecedented rates, and the swarm's tactics had evolved. They are learning, Admiral Dexner said. The Vryn have adapted to our defensive patterns, casualty projections. Someone asked the tactical AI, processed the data. Current trajectory indicates Vryn forces will reach Zinthari Prime in 4 months. It stated, defensive fleet will be insufficient to prevent planetary assault. Probability of successful defense, 12%. The chamber fell silent. 12% was essentially zero in Zinthari tactical doctrine. Recommendation: begin evacuation of non-essential personnel. The AI said, prepare core worlds for siege protocols. Establish fallback positions in the outer territories. Calvos watched the council members process this information. Zinthari Collective had never lost a war. They had never even conceived of losing a war. Their mathematical superiority had always ensured victory until now. We need alternatives, High Counselor Vexter said. The mathematics are clear. The AI replied, then change the mathematics. Calvos felt a chill. That phrase he had heard it before from Captain Santos at Krontos Station. A human liaison stepped forward. Commander. Jackson was an older human with gray in her hair and scars on her face. The Terran Federation has a proposal, she said. The holographic display shifted, showing a tactical map of Vryn space. This is their primary breeding cluster. Jackson continued. 7 worlds dedicated to producing Vryn warriors. They're the source of the swarm's numerical advantage. We are aware of these worlds, Dexner said. They are deep in hostile territory and heavily defended. We can reach them. The casualty rate for such an operation would be catastrophic. Yes, Jackson agreed. It would. Then why propose it? Jackson's expression hardened. Because sometimes you have to hurt the enemy so badly they stop coming. She said, you've been fighting defensive battles, trying to minimize losses. The Vryn don't care about losses, so you're losing the math war. She pointed at the breeding worlds. But if we take out their production, if we burn these worlds, they lose their advantage. That would require the AI paused. The projected force necessary would constitute 60% of all human military assets in this sector, with an estimated loss rate of 85%. Correct. That is unacceptable. To you maybe, Jackson said. But Earth Command has authorized the operation. We're doing this with or without collective support. The council erupted in debate. Calvos felt his translator struggling to keep up with multiple conversations. He found himself walking to the front of the chamber. High Counselor, he said, I request permission to speak. Vexter looked surprised but nodded. Observer. Calvos, you have studied the humans extensively, the counselor said. What is your assessment of this proposal? Calvos chose his words carefully. The human proposal is not a military strike, he said. It is a message. Explain. Humans do not fight to win tactical objectives, he continued. They fight to ensure the enemy can never threaten them again. This is not about destroying 7 worlds. It is about showing the Vryn what will happen if they continue. That is genocide. Yes, Calvos said quietly. It is. We cannot condone such actions. Then you will lose this war. Calvos said. The chamber fell silent again. The Vryn do not negotiate, he continued. They do not surrender. They consume everything and will continue consuming until they are stopped. The humans understand this because they have faced existential threats before. He gestured to the display. What Commander Jackson is proposing is a human solution to an inhuman problem, he said. It is brutal and horrifying and strategically necessary. You advocate for this. I advocate for survival. Calvos replied, and I have learned that humans excel at survival. The vote took 3 hours in the end, the council authorized the operation. Humanitarian concerns were noted, ethical objections were recorded, but the 12% probability of defending Centauri Prime was the deciding factor. Calvos volunteered to accompany the human fleet. As an observer, Captain Santos was surprised when he reported to the Thermopylae. "You don't have to do this," she said. "This is going to be bad." "I know," Calvos replied. "That is why I must witness it." "Why?" "Because someone needs to remember what this cost." Santos studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Welcome aboard, observer," she said. "Find yourself a spot in the armory. We launch in 6 hours. The human fleet assembled over 3 days, warships fresh from Earth colony vessels converted to carriers, civilian freighters rigged with weapons. Every ship carried the same emblem, a blue and green planet on a black field Earth. Children going to war. Calvos stood on the Thermopylae bridge as the fleet prepared to jump. There were 147 vessels, carrying 200,000 human soldiers, going to fight through Rin space to reach targets deep in enemy territory. The odds of success were minuscule. The odds of survival even worse, and yet the communications channels were filled with human chatter, jokes and songs and messages home. "Do they not understand," Calvos asked Santos, "that most of them will die?" "They understand," she replied. "They're making peace with it." "How can they be at peace with death?" Santos looked at him. "Because we've been making peace with death since we climbed out of the trees," she said. "It's part of being human. We know we're mortal. We know death is coming, so we decide what's worth dying for. And this is worth it. Stopping the Rin before they consume the galaxy," Santos said. "Yeah, that's worth it." The fleet jumped hyperspace transit. Took them 3 weeks, with the fleet stopping periodically to refuel and regroup. Calvos used the time to talk with the human soldiers. He met a young Marine named Thompson, who had left behind a wife and infant daughter. "Why did you volunteer?" Calvos asked. "So my daughter grows up in a universe without the Vrin." Thompson said simply he met a pilot named Wu who had survived the Tau SETI campaign. "This is my 4th deployment," she said, "and hopefully my last." "You believe you will survive?" "No." Wu said, "I believe this will be the last deployment anyone needs to make against the Vrin." He met a medic named Okonkwo who carried a letter in her pocket. "My grandfather wrote this during Earth's last war," she explained. "He survived against impossible odds. I carry it for luck." "What does it say?" She read it aloud. "We fight not because we will win, but because some things are worth fighting for even when winning is impossible." The fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of Rin territory. The real war was about to begin, and Calvos realized that he had volunteered to witness something that would define his understanding of humanity forever. He was about to watch the most terrifying species in the galaxy do what they did best: fight. Without limits, fight. Without mercy, fight. Until the enemy understood that continuing meant annihilation, he was about to see humans wage total war, and he knew already that what he witnessed would haunt him for the rest of his life. Captain Santos gave the order. "All ships," she broadcast. "We are entering Vrin space. Our mission is clear. Our purpose is just." She paused. "We did not start this war," she continued. "But by every god and ancestor, we're going to finish it. Make ready for combat." The human fleet powered weapons and accelerated toward the first Rin positions. Calvos gripped the armrest of his observer station. He had read about human warfare in history files. Now he was going to see it firsthand. Now he was going to understand what it meant when humans decided that something had to be destroyed. Now he was going to learn the true meaning of fear. The first Rin patrol fleet died without knowing what hit them. The human warships emerged from hyperspace, already firing railguns, launched projectiles at relativistic speeds, missiles streaked through the void, energy weapons carved through Vrin. Bioships like knives through flesh. Calvos watched, From the Thermopylae Bridge, as the tactical display updated 17 Vrin vessels destroyed in the opening salvo, 0 human casualties. They didn't even have time to transmit a warning. The communications officer reported. Good, Captain Santos said. Maintain formation, proceed to waypoint Beta. The fleet moved deeper into Vrin space. They encountered resistance at the second system of Vrin defense cluster with over 100 vessels. The battle lasted 4 hours. The humans lost 8 ships. The Vrin lost everything. Calivos began to understand the strategy. This was not a careful advance with calculated risks. This was a rampage. The human fleet carved through Vrin territory like a blade. Every encounter ended in total destruction of Vrin forces. The humans took casualties, but they did not slow down. They did not stop to recover wounded or salvage damaged vessels. Ships too damaged to continue were stripped of crew and sent on collision courses with Vrin installations. We are leaving wreckage behind, Calvos noted. Don't need it, Santos replied. We're not coming back this way. That statement chilled him. Fleet pushed forward for 6 days. The Vrin began to mass forces to intercept. Thema High fleet of 300 vessels moved to block their path. Commander Jackson addressed the fleet from the flagship. All vessels, the enemy has positioned themselves between us and our objective, she said. We are going through them, Commander. One of the ship captains said. The odds are irrelevant, Jackson finished. We knew this was a one-way trip. We knew we'd face everything the Vrin could throw at us, and we're here anyway. Her voice hardened. We are 200,000 humans going to burn the enemy's home, she said. We are our species' answer to the Vrin swarm, and we will not stop, we will not surrender, we will not fail. Today we show them what happens when you threaten humanity. The human fleet charged, the Vrin swarm met them head-on. Battle was chaos. Ships exploded, debris filled space. Vrin bioships swarmed human vessels, trying to overwhelm them through numbers. The humans fought like demons. Calvos watched the Thermopylae take hit after hit. Hull breaches vented. Atmosphere fires broke out in 3 decks. Casualties mounted, and Captain Santos stood on the bridge directing the fight with calm precision. Port batteries focus fire on that cluster. Starboard batteries cover our flank, she ordered. The ship shuddered as a Vrin weapon struck the reactor shielding. Engineering reports core stability at 60%. The damage control officer said. Tell them to keep it together for another hour. Santos replied. Captain, we're taking too much damage. Then we take damage, she said. But we keep fighting. A Vrin vessel rammed the destroyer. Valiant Calvos watched it break apart on the tactical display. 3,000 humans died in seconds. Fleet did not slow. The cruiser Indomitable lost main power and drifted into Vrin weapons range. The crew fought with emergency batteries until ammunition ran out. Then they activated the self-destruct and took 20 Vrin ships with them. The carrier Lexington suffered catastrophic damage to her flight decks, unable to recover her fighters. She transmitted a final message. To all pilots, find somewhere else to land, we're going in. She accelerated at full power towards this Vrin vessel. The collision destroyed them both, and still the humans pushed forward. Calvos felt something he had never experienced in 300 cycles of civilized warfare. He felt terror, not terror of the Vrin, terror of what his allies were capable of. These humans were winning through sheer refusal to accept defeat. They were losing ships and lives at a catastrophic rate, and they did not care. They just kept fighting. After 8 hours, the Vrin fleet broke. Swarm calculated that continuing would result in complete annihilation of their forces. They withdrew. The human fleet had lost 43 vessels. 60,000 humans were dead, and they continued toward the breeding worlds. Captain, Calvos said quietly. The casualties. I know, Santos replied. Was it worth it? She looked at him with eyes that had seen too much. Ask me when we're done. The fleet reached the first breeding world. 2 days later, Calvos stood on the bridge and looked at the planet on the viewscreen. It was beautiful in its own way. Purple clouds swirled over green oceans. 3 moons hung in orbit, and the entire surface was covered in Vrin hatcheries, billions of larvae growing into warriors. Target solutions locked. The weapons officer reported. Captain Santos took a deep breath. All ships, she said, execute bombardment pattern Delta. The human fleet opened fire. Kinetic bombardment struck the planet's surface. Tungsten rods traveling at orbital velocities hit like nuclear weapons. The atmosphere ignited. Fresh storms spread across continents. The weapons continued for 6 hours. When it was done, the planet's surface temperature had risen by 300 degrees. Nothing survived. Nothing could survive. Kalos stared at the burning world and felt his secondary eyelids close involuntarily. You destroyed it, he whispered. That was the mission. Santos replied. Her voice was flat and motionless, but Calavas could see her hands trembling. How many died? Estimates put the Vrin population at 40 billion, she said. All dead now. And you feel nothing. Santos turned to him, and her eyes were wet. Feel everything, she said. I feel sick and horrified and guilty, and I will carry this for the rest of my life. Then why? Because they would have done the same to us, she said. Because this ends the war. Because 40 billion Vrin here means 3 trillion other lives across the galaxy that survive. She wiped her eyes. We do not do this easily, observer. She continued, but we do it when we must. The fleet moved to the 2nd breeding world, and the 3rd and the 4th. Each world burned. Each bombardment executed with ruthless efficiency. The human fleet lost more ships to Vrin defenders, but they did not stop. They could not stop. This was total war. This was extinction made manifest. This was humanity showing the galaxy what they were capable of. When pushed to the edge on the 7th day, they reached the final breeding world, the largest and oldest of the Vrin nurseries, home to over 100 billion larvae. The Vrin threw everything at the human fleet. Every defender, every weapon, every vessel. The battle lasted 16 hours. The human fleet was reduced to 38 ships. The 38 ships. Thermopylae had lost 70% of her crew. Captain Santos stood on a bridge that was more wreckage than ship. Final target locked, the weapons officer said. Santos looked at Calvos. This is what you wanted to see, she said. This is what we are. She gave the order. The bombardment began. Calvos watched the world burn. He watched continents crack. He watched oceans boil. He watched the death of 100 billion living things, and he understood this was not warfare. This was a message. This was humanity saying to the universe, do not threaten us, because we will burn your worlds. We will destroy your future. We will commit genocide if that is what survival requires. Fleet transmitted the data back to Zentari space, real-time footage of the burning worlds, proof of what had been done. And then they sent it to the Vrinto, the High Fleet gathering at Zentari Prime. Captain Santos composed the message herself. This is Commander Maria Santos of the Terran Federation, she said. You came to our sector seeking to consume. We have burned 7 of your breeding worlds. 180 billion of your young are dead. She leaned forward. You can continue to Zentari Prime, she continued. You can try to overwhelm our defenses. You might even succeed. But understand this, she said. If you do, we will burn every Vrin world we can reach. We will hunt your species across the galaxy. We will not stop until the Vrin are extinct. Or you can leave now, she finished, and never return. The message was transmitted. The human fleet Wake Calvo stood beside Santos on the broken bridge. What if they do not retreat? He asked. Then we die here, she said. And the second wave finishes what we started. There is a second wave. There's always a second wave. Santos said, humanity doesn't do half measures. 3 hours later, the Vrin fleet at Zentari Prime changed course. The swarm withdrew from collective space. The hive mind had calculated. Continuing meant extinction. Survival meant retreat. The war was over. The human fleet began the long journey home of 147 vessels. Only 31 remained of 200,000 soldiers only. 42,000 survived. Calvos walked through the Thermopolis corridors and saw the cosmetics working triple shift crew sleeping at duty stations, Marines staring at nothing. These were not conquerors celebrating victory. These were survivors. Carrying the weight of what they had done, he found Captain Santos in her quarters. She sat at her desk writing letters, one for each of the 127 Marines she had lost at Kratasone, for each officer who had died under her command. Personal messages to family she would never meet. "You did not have to do this," Calvo said. "Yes, I did," she replied. "They died following my orders. The least I can do is tell their families why." She looked up at him. "You got your answer, observer," she said. "You know what we are now." Calvos nodded slowly. "You are the most terrifying species in known space," he said. "Not because you are cruel, but because you are willing to be cruel when you must. You do not enjoy violence, but you excel at it. You would prefer peace, but you will wage total war if that is what survival requires. And that scares you.